All right. Recording, and here we go. Welcome back. It's yet another weekly challenge. Here we are at Developreneur, Building Better Developers. I'm Rob Broadhead, one of the founders of Developreneur, also the founder of RB Consulting. We help you find clarity and avoid costly technology mistakes before they happen. Good thing and bad thing. Good thing is we have a very different topic this week, or at least a very different area of discussion. We have not discussed legal stuff in quite a while. And so that was awesome. I think it was, and we're going to spend more time talking about this here in a few minutes, but it makes for a great change of pace, even though we still have some cracks that we're going to find a way. We're going to find a way to point those out as well. The bad thing is, this is one of those things that sometimes we get a little over our head. And so, because the legal side, we don't really know as much. So I don't know if the questions were necessarily the best ever. But that being said, we'll dive into it and see how it goes. Michael, introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael Malash. I'm one of the co-founders of Developreneur, Building Better Developers. I'm also the founder of Envision QA, where we help growing businesses eliminate bottlenecks, automate operations, and build systems at scale through process discovery, automation, and custom software solutions. Good thing, bad thing. Hey, it's a end of another week. We're getting ready to go into the weekend, and hopefully the weather will be nice this weekend, and I can actually get outside and enjoy my new deck.
Always good. So let's dive right into talking about Philip. So Phil Crowley is who we talked to this week. If you haven't listened to it, go ahead and pause, go back, watch both episodes. There's a lot of, especially if you are a side hustler founder, a lot of good information there, especially if you're just getting started, or honestly, if you haven't had legal counsel before, there's a lot of good things in there that he mentions, including his book, is that he gives you, which is like, it's like the perfect recipe for anything, is like, what is it that I should do before I get started so I don't fail? Basically is what his book is. It's that standard approach, and it's exactly what we need. And I love that he makes it sort of story-ish. And so, we'll see how that goes. But the content he gave us was great. I highly recommend checking out his book and take some notes as you're doing so. It's interesting that he also hits on something that we have I know that I talk on a regular basis about, in particular, where he actually mentions that technology startups don't fail because of the technology, they fail because of legal mistakes. And I think it's a little narrow, but I found that, and maybe it isn't, but I think it's very much more that projects, products, and even companies have issues, and they fail from a technology point of view because they're focusing on the technology instead of focusing on the business. What is the core stuff there? Is like, what do we make? What do we offer? Who's our ideal customer? Why are we here? Why does anybody care? And why do people want to give us money for whatever it is that we offer? It's a little bit in the same area as the legal. I think the legal feels like he really did a good job. I think it felt of like making it a foundational kind of thing, making sure you've got a good foundation to build on top of. And it probably is one of those things that actually comes maybe even before figuring out your business and how you want to do it, is understanding the legalities around it enough to make sure that you've properly structured that. What's your take on this week?
Well, I'm going to kind of continue that thread because a couple of years ago, I went through that co-starter program and relaunching the business. And our discussion with Phil kind of brought that back. It reiterated a lot of the things that we talked about in starting up a business, getting your business going, all the legalities around it. The biggest thing, though, is setting up the legal side of your business isn't one and done. It is an ongoing process. And Phil talked about that a lot, like, form the LLC or Corp. Written agreements matter. Oh my God. How many times have I stumbled over the years writing good contracts when if you have a good lawyer or they could write you a better contract that was more legally binding. It was interesting because he talked about, you could go on the internet and download some legal documents, but if you don't know what you're doing, you could download like an agricultural legal document for a technical document, which has no legal binding whatsoever, and you're on the hook for whatever goes wrong. Interestingly enough, though, that kind of got us into the conversation of where, the cracks of AI. AI, unfortunately, well, it is great to help you do the research for finding out your legal problems, helping you do things. It's still the same problem as just going out and grabbing a form that looks like it's the right contract. You still need to talk to someone that understands the law, especially in your state, because AI, unless you are very explicit with what you're doing, it could still give you wrong information. It could give you information, legal information for a different country, a different state, a different sector. And then you're trying to do this with your business and you are basically setting yourself up to fail. So I really like the kind of warnings and the guidelines he laid out with that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this was like a really good crack that showed up as we got into this, was the whole idea of, I'm going to summarize a little differently. We talked about it, but basically AI is based on what has happened in the past. Look at what happens, look what exists, and then basically use that to estimate what the future is going to look like. Well, one, that's not always the case. There are things that change. There are things that are watershed moments. If you took everything that AI would have looked at in 2020, right before March 1 kind of time frame, you would get something very different from your results than if you did it a year later when it looked very closely at what had happened in the previous 12 months. There are things like that that occur that AI is just not usually going to be able to absorb fast enough. If you're using, trusting LLMs and stuff like that. Now, if you're training it yourself, that's part of the trick, is making sure that you're keeping its knowledge up to date enough that it can make intelligent decisions. But it's interesting how he said that a lot of times, I think he may have oversimplified a little bit, but it's very interesting that something that appears a lot is almost naturally going to get more weight than something that doesn't appear as often. So if you have a bad thing that is argued and debated, then you may actually have that one show up and sort of shadow the correct solution or the better solution. So very much an AI crack is that it only knows what you've given it. It only knows what it knows. It does not know what it does not know. It'll just guess, or it'll fill in gaps, essentially, which turns it into something that is really not helpful in a legal sense. Now, I will share that I sat down with somebody one time and we were working through an NDA, trying to figure out how to get that to work on both sides, correcting some of the language and stuff like that. We sat down with an AI and it actually helped us quite a bit. The key there is then we were going to take that goes to the lawyers. They can go confirm it because neither of us were lawyers. Gave us a good start, maybe helped reduce the cost because we didn't need the lawyers to work their way through it as much. But it comes back to, okay, here's our work. Please check our work for us. Trust, not verify. Thoughts on that, or further thoughts on the conversation with Phil?
Yeah, so I touched on the Co-Starter program. Towards the end of our interview with him, he touched on, use accelerators and startup networks, to help grow your business, to help find the information you need, especially on the legal side. Because sometimes, like you said, you don't know what you don't know when it comes to legal. So just going out and searching, you might go down the wrong rabbit hole and get the wrong information. The other thing that was really interesting, and I didn't think about this a lot till he brought it up, is founders' disputes. If you don't really put a contract in place, you're just two buddies trying to go start a company, you could end up in a situation where you are on the hook for 100% of the work and your partner still has to get paid because you did not do the legal work up front. It kind of reminded me like back in school, when you had to do group projects, you always had that one person that didn't do the work, but got the credit for doing the work. Same thing can happen in business. So I really found that to be very enlightening, because it's like, okay, you really need to have a legal binding document between business partners and even your customers, so that you are protected, that everyone knows what's going on and what is expected from them.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the news recently was Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire, and there are people that are janitors or cafeteria workers that are now millionaires because of the SpaceX IPO and things like that. And this is not new. There are a lot of situations, and you can look back to stories between like Microsoft and IBM and Apple and some of these where people were very close, and as they grew and the money became real and big things occurred, then suddenly you have big reason to, have grind your axe. Basically, it's one thing if you're just a couple of people working on a company and it's you're splitting $100 at the end of the day because that's what happened. That's how much you guys earned, and you're going separate ways. Okay, not a big deal. If it's $100 million. That split matters a lot. 1%, now you're talking $1 million per percent. And now suddenly lawyers become very useful in that case, because they're like, hey, I'll take my cut. So I think these are things that I think the best thing about this is he talked about do it when everybody's happy and everybody's agreeable and all that kind of stuff before the drama and the stress and everything else steps into it. Because once that occurs, then people stop being rational. They've got all this other crap going on, and it becomes much, much more difficult to resolve it. I remember talking with a lawyer one time, and one of the things he did was divorce attorney. And I asked him, I was like, you see all this stuff on the movies and stuff like that about or in the, the news about how horrible some things are. And occasionally they seem like they're not. I was like, well, how does that work in real life when you're talking about normal people and just average Joes and Jolinas or whatever it happens to be? And he said it really comes down to it's going to be as complicated as the most annoying person wants it to be, basically. It's whoever, if both sides agree we don't want it complicated, then it's not going to be. Business is the same way. If everybody agrees all the way through, then it's not going to be a problem. The thing is you don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now. It's very different if you are, like his example is if you've got a couple people that are right next to each other and they're working great and they've got the time, but then somebody has kids or somebody moves away or somebody gets a different job. Those things all can have a very big impact. And it's like, what's fair to make sure that they're properly compensated for? And you need to be able to assess that when you have to you're in a position to put yourself in both sides of the argument, both people's shoes, as opposed to just being the one that's, having to leave something they worked hard for, or somebody else that sees a lot of work that they're going to have to continue to do while this other person, mooches off their success as they may look at it. So any more thoughts on that or on Philip?
Only thing I would say is, the internet can give you a lot of advice, but when it comes to legal, definitely talk to a lawyer.
And do that for technology. And if it gives you technology advice, definitely talk to a true technologist.
Us.
Challenge for this week. This one was one I was thinking about a little bit, trying to figure out what is a good fit. And I think the one I came up with is actually a fun little AI challenge as well. And you can do Google search or whatever, or favorite search if you like. But I think it'd be a fun one with AI is give an idea of your company, whether it exists or it's something that you're building, and say, this is what I'm doing or this is what I have. And just ask AI, what are the top 10 things I need to do to be legally protected, or that I can do to better legally protect my interests in this company, and see what it comes back with. And continue the conversation with it. Go a little deeper on some of those. If it says, put together a clear ownership contract among the founders, and ask it what would one look like? What are some of the things we need to be concerned about? The legal side is obviously important, and you probably will learn something about it. But I think the process of getting yourself so that you can put it in front of a legal expert is even better. Is how would we negotiate something? Where would we even start for something like that? And that includes, like, if you want to do, if you think about patents or copywriting material or registered trademarks or those kinds of things that fall into those areas. I think it's always very enlightening, at least to me, to ask those kinds of questions and see essentially what is it that I'm missing? What is it that I should do that maybe I haven't? Or what is there something that I think I did that as I go a little deeper into it, I realize I didn't actually do it the right way? Thoughts on that challenge?
Yeah. Oh, I like the challenge. One of the fun things with that, especially, not doing things the right way, is ask AI to assess the conversation that you're having. So as you're talking to AI, go, all right, now where are we at with this conversation? Because you might go down rabbit holes you may not expect. You might get ideas that span other ideas. But especially when you're using AI, you have to be careful not to overwhelm it with too many threads in one chat. So if you do start doing this, keep a list. If you start getting multiple topics, do your searches, write down your results, but keep them separate. And then go back into AI and throw them all in there and say, okay, assess all of this. Don't just assess one at a time, because you could go down many rabbit holes and then you're going to get very mixed results from the AI.
I think that's all of that is great. Is you definitely have to watch with any of these as you get into your conversations that you keep that context correct, just like you would with a human being. Sometimes human beings get off into different directions and go places that, like, how did we get here? AI does the same thing. We don't refer to humans as doing it as hallucinations, but people do that, and we've done that. We could go to any of our past conversations, and you will see that very often we start with a certain topic with whoever the guest is, and we will go far and wide with that because we just do. And then sometimes you have to go, where did we start? What did we actually cover? And things like that. Same thing. Make sure you keep that context clear and concise, and use that to also build your, as Michael said, I think it's very helpful when you get done, if you go into these piecemeal conversations, bring them all back together, get a summary or a roll up to essentially say, okay, now let's take it as a whole. That's just bonus AI stuff right there. It really has nothing to do with the challenge itself this week. That being said, you now have a challenge. We now have talked about what went this week. So we're going to let you go on to your weekend. Go out there, have yourself a great day, a great week, a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.